All right, so we're gonna keep moving forward with our agenda. A good point that was brought up is Lancaster's a lot different than we are, so how do we do this here? So that's exactly what we're gonna talk about now. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Brittany Reno, who is the Executive Director of the Sharpsburg Neighborhood Organization. She's also a council person in Sharpsburg Borough and a member of Connect. And she's going to talk about passing the policy in Sharpsburg, and then followed by Kristin Saunders, who is the Principal Transportation Planner at the City of Pittsburgh's Mobility and Infrastructure Department. So, welcome, Brittany.
Hi everyone, I'm Brittany Reno. As Kristin said, I'm the Executive Director of Sharpsburg Neighborhood Organization and a councilwoman in Sharpsburg Borough. I'm going to talk about our Complete Streets resolution. It is not an ordinance, but we might be working our way up there. So a little bit to start about Sharpsburg. If you look up in the top right-hand corner there, you can get an idea of where Sharpsburg is. It's a first-ring suburb of the city of Pittsburgh. Very urban layout, very dense, and right across the river from Lawrenceville, Morningside Highland Park. So connected adjacently to very pedestrian and increasingly bike-friendly places, but so far we are not there yet. We have 3,400 residents, so it's a pretty small municipality, and it has its own local government, so we operate independently. We're 0.63 square miles, but about a quarter of that is in the river. So we do have a free kayak launch and a free boat launch, so we're taking multimodal in certain directions, and now we've got to work on the land connections as well. 28% of our residents have no access to a personal vehicle. Thanks to Port Authority, we do have regular bus stops throughout town on Main Street, and the town is very long and skinny, so pretty much every resident is within a quarter mile of a bus stop, which is great. 27% of our residents live in poverty, 37% of our kids are growing up in poverty. About 50% of households with kids in Sharpsburg are led by single parents. So it's pretty cool in Sharpsburg. We still have that hometown, small town feel where groups of 10-year-olds will be walking down the street between parks, skateboarding, basically exploring the town and getting to know neighbors, and the neighbors get to know them. So it's really special, and that's something that we want to build on. 13.2% unemployment rate in Sharpsburg, which is about double the regional average. That's a lot of things. It's the collapse of the manufacturing and steel industries, where a lot of our people were employed for a long time. And then we have persistent air pollution concerns and flooding problems. The air pollution is mostly because we are, like I said, long, skinny borough, sandwiched between Route 28 on the north and the railroad to the south, and then two other PennDOT roads to our east and west. And then we're geographically in a river valley along the Allegheny River, so the pollution comes from across the river or from these point sources more locally and just kind of nestles there and sits over Sharpsburg. So we have a lot of different challenges. No one thing's going to solve all of them. No one thing is going to solve any of them. But every day I'm asking myself, how can I address these problems as efficiently as possible with as few resources as possible, because we don't have a ton of resources. We don't have a lot of tax dollars coming in. Our financial situation at the borough is definitely stable and good, but we don't have a ton of money for extras like bike lanes and vast signage across the borough. So why Complete Streets? I had not heard of Complete Streets before last year when I saw a Connect presentation from the city of Pittsburgh about their new ordinance. And I mean, it's not too difficult of a concept to grasp, complete streets, being able to walk around no matter what kind of mode of transit you're using and get there safely and pleasantly as possible. So I was pretty on board, but there are multiple reasons that it makes a lot of sense for Sharpsburg and communities like Sharpsburg. One, public safety is a big one, and I found that this is a really popular rallying point for people in the community, regardless of politics, regardless of other priorities or what kind of day you live. Everybody in Sharpsburg, from what I've found in talking to a lot of residents, want their kids and their mothers and their grandmothers and themselves to be able to walk through town, walk out their door, and walk to the places they want to get to without getting hit by a car. So Not getting hit by cars is another popular rallying point for Sharpsburgers, it turns out. And I only moved here to this community in 2013, and so I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of people could perceive me as an outsider. And so in terms of low-hanging fruit and wanting to do work that the community supports and can really rally around, this complete streets in general has been a huge thing, number one because of public safety. Right here, what you're looking at is one of the busiest pedestrian areas in town. It's not the central business district, but it's a mixed-use district. In the center there, you'll see Kennedy Park, which is our second biggest patch of green space in town. It's where most of our community events are held. On the right-hand side, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a Kogo's gas station, a hot spot in Sharpsburg all day long, and then Hitchhiker Brewery, which is a craft brewery that just moved in across the street from that. We also have the VFW closer to the center. But I live on this street. This is a PennDOT owned road, North Canal Street at the top. And there are so many people who walk down this street every day. And as you'll see, we have existing crosswalks, 3 of them down in the bottom left there. And then everywhere else, every red circle is a really popular crossing area that is not marked by a sign, by a crosswalk, by anything. And so you have kids on scooters, on the recumbent bikes, on regular bikes, a lot of pedestrians, and a whole lot of cars going this way. And in that intersection in particular, that's the Kogos has 3 or 4 different places where the cars can leave. So this is from one perspective to another, it's either a 5-way or an 8-way intersection where there are no crosswalks. And with this brewery opening up and the public park being there and the gas station being there, we have so many people crossing these streets, and the near accidents I see there every week are kind of outrageous. And so getting on board with this policy and having a way to really advocate, especially to higher entities like PennDOT who do control these roads, is a primary motivator for this work in Sharpsburg. From a public health standpoint, and not all of this stuff relates to complete streets obviously, but it kind of shows the culture in Sharpsburg, not of unhealthiness per se, but of how difficult it is to make healthy decisions in Sharpsburg. Like Hannah from the health department said, I want to make it easier for Sharpsburgers to make good, healthy decisions and for their kids to be able to make these decisions and learn earlier how to live as healthy a lifestyle as possible. So we're a food desert, no grocery store, 27% smoking rate, no primary care doctor in the borough, high rates of hypertension, 18% of our residents are living with a disability, and about 20% of our residents are seniors. So in Sharpsburg, sometimes I'm working on Main Street in a shared space, and I see seniors in wheelchairs scooting down the middle of the street because they can't use the sidewalks. And I see groups of seniors walking from the high rise to the breakfast cafe in town, clinging to each other for dear life because they fall, like people fall in these streets. I see moms in strollers on the edges of town going down highways essentially and not on a sidewalk, and they have to pick the stroller up and lift it to get back on the sidewalk. So these people aren't usually in planning meetings because they're busy like going to 2 jobs and worrying about getting their kid to the doctor or getting to the PTO appointment or whatever. So people have bigger fish to fry in their personal lives, so I want to make it easier for them to not have to worry about this and to be able to take advantage of these things and free ways to exercise and stay healthy, like walking. And the air pollution also. My hope eventually, along with the parking problem in Sharpsburg, is that complete streets could alleviate some of these things. Like I said, it's not going to solve any of them wholly, but if we get, even 20 families who have 1 car or 0 cars instead of 3 or 4 or 5 cars, it'll have a measurable impact, at least on the quality of life for the residents who live there. And workforce and economic development. Previous speakers have talked about this, but I want to highlight how important it is for Sharpsburg. Like I said, we have a lot of bus stops, and they go downtown, they go through city neighborhoods, they go to the north side, they go to Millvale, they even go up to RIDC Park and the Waterworks Mall. So there are a lot of employment opportunities along these public transit routes, but willing more people to be willing to use these routes is kind of a struggle in Sharpsburg because even though we're close, bus stops are close to the houses, a lot of people can't walk on the sidewalks because they're broken up, or there are trucks parked on the sidewalks because the roads are too narrow, and they were designed back in the 1800s when people didn't have personal vehicles. So being able to make the transit experience more pleasant, safer bike routes, less oppressive walking routes to the bus stops, shaded trees, things like that, I think they all work in tandem to improve the likelihood that people will be using public transit and won't need to move into Sharpsburg with 4 or 5 cars per family. We want to make the business district more walkable. We have a lot more businesses starting to move in and being interested in coming in. A lot of it is because of our intact Main Street and the fact that we have a lot of the old buildings, we have a lot of the pedestrian infrastructure built out already, but we have one bike rack in town, and it's at the library, and that's down the road. That's not near any of the businesses. So on one hand, we do have new businesses starting to fund their own bike racks or thinking about funding their own bike racks, which is great, but we really want to take the lead on that and not kind of follow along behind the businesses. And so not only do we want people in Sharpsburg to be able to walk around Sharpsburg and connect to other communities and opportunities in other communities, we want people from other communities to be able to come into Sharpsburg and walk around safely, park or store their bike pretty easily, and get to a bus route if they want to take that in the best way that they can. And the last reason Complete Streets was a good plan for Sharpsburg, to give some context on the neighborhood, late last year we got a grant from the Hillman Foundation to do a community vision and design plan process with Evolve, which is a sustainable architecture and environmental design firm. And so we've been working on this process for the last 9 months, having a lot of meetings with residents, little kids, residents who've lived here for 60, 70 years and saw Sharpsburg in its heyday, and trying to figure out how we can rally together around a shared vision that we can all work for, that multiple stakeholder groups can buy into and have a reason to root for and really advocate for. So, like I said, out of these meetings, we found that regardless of other priorities or what your job was, what your income was, what your lifestyle is, everybody wants to be able to walk safely through the town, and people recognize the benefits of, say, a bike trail, a walking trail. They want their kids to be able to walk safely. They want themselves to be able to walk safely. So we found that to be a really easy rallying point for the community. So on to how we did it, with a whole lot of help, because I could not and probably would not have done this by myself. The first part was engaging knowledgeable partners, which I'll talk about, affirming the public buy-in, and then drafting and passing the resolution. Our knowledgeable partners are all here in the room, and I thank you all so much for all of your help. Connect was really, like I said, integral to this whole thing kicking off when Kristin and Lindsay brought the City of Pittsburgh Planning Department in to talk about the Complete Streets plan that they were working on. My mind was kind of blown because it seems so obvious now that I've been in it for like a year and a half thinking about this stuff, but nobody in Sharpsburg was talking about walkability. I mean, it was kind of like the borough would get complaints about sidewalks crumbling, and we'd say, well, the business has to fix that. And that was the end of the discussion. But thinking more deeply about what the role of the municipality could be and what impact we could have on a larger scale and on a longer timeline, it wasn't going to be an instant cure, but it could be a shift in a mindset that could last beyond my time in office or even this decade or generations from now. So Connect was integral, and they also connect us to all the other partners like the American Heart Association. Jesabel's in the audience right now, and I don't think everybody's going to get this VIP treatment, but she's the community health director at the Pittsburgh chapter of the American Heart Association. She connected me with their government relations director, who gave me so much help in terms of connecting me with ordinances. The borough of Elizabethtown's ordinance in Lancaster County ended up being probably our biggest model that we adopted from, stole from, I should say, because it was really good language. And the cool thing about doing the resolution in Sharpsburg, it's really hard to do new things. There's been the same people in charge for a really long time, but rather than going with an ordinance that I didn't think our municipality would have the capacity to really enforce in the way it deserved to be enforced, I decided to go with a resolution to show that, hey, this is our intent as a municipality, as a community, to change the way we're thinking about these things from the beginning instead of finding ourselves 50 years from now wondering why the heck we didn't start sooner. So the American Heart Association was awesome. They also connected us with an intern who helped me and came out to community events with me to advocate for these policies and talk to residents one-on-one about what kind of improvements specifically related to complete streets they wanted to see. So she compiled all the feedback from postcards that we got from residents. Now I have a database of residents, what block they live in, what their specific concerns on their block are, and different quotes like, I want my kid to be able to ride her bike from the Riverfront Park to Kennedy Park and be safe and not need me to be there with her every minute. So the American Heart Association is key, and I know they'd be open to helping any of you do the same thing in your communities. But Eric came to one of our council meetings when I was getting ready to launch this legislation and hopefully get it passed, and he stood before council and talked about how this is something that's happening across the country, that it's been kind of slow to pick up in Pennsylvania, but now we're starting to get momentum, and that it would be a good thing for the community, economic development-wise and environmental-wise, resident health-wise. So that was a big help. And PA Walkworks, Carol, PA Walkworks is a program under the State Department of Health, and essentially they're all about advocating and creating enhanced walking routes. They also focus on seniors a lot too, so they have connections with the AARP, and Carol has come to the council meeting where I was passing it and also advocated for the resolution, and since then she's also sent me a ton of grant opportunities for building out those resources and getting more bike infrastructure and walking infrastructure in town. So all these partners did more work than I did, and it made my job really easy. So I really recommend anybody who's interested in this talking to these people, especially Kristin and Lindsay can connect you really easily with all these people. Here's an example of the Complete Streets postcard from the American Heart Association. They printed them, they brought them to Sharpsburg, and I just had to talk to residents and ask why they wanted safer streets. And it made for a nice show when I brought in the postcards and showed them to the council people in a pre-meeting before the meeting. And it has an effect to show that it's not just you or not just me sitting at the end of the table saying, hey, this would be cool. It's a bunch of residents from across town saying they want this, across demographics, saying that this is important to them. And it's a lot harder to ignore a movement than one crazy individual on the end of the dais. And again, the community vision plan workshops, we had Evolve ran an activity where we did a headline prediction, which was asking residents to draw out and write out what they'd want a New York Times article about Sharpsburg to say 5 years from now. And nearly everyone said walkable, affordable riverfront community. So, I mean, across the board, we've had this mandate that people want to be connected to other parts of town. They want to be connected safely to the riverfront, to Etna, to Aspinwall, to the city neighborhoods. And so it was really easy to run with that. Drafting and passing the resolution. This was my first resolution I passed. I came on council in 2015. Thank you. But I had no idea what I was doing, and I still am kind of like, wow, I can't believe that happened. So like I said, it was adapted from the Borough of Elizabethtown's resolution mostly, but I did take some of the good meatier parts out of the city of Pittsburgh's policy and kind of weave them in throughout, because there are a lot of good policies out there, and picking the parts that work best for your municipality is something that you'll have to do within your community. And then we also had Bike Pittsburgh and PA Walkworks come in and advocate on behalf of the policy to the council, and it worked because it passed unanimously. So what's next? Well, the resolution doesn't have a ton of teeth because we have three full-time office staff in Sharpsburg, and they're already too busy. So what's next is trying to figure out a more concrete plan and getting this plugged into the planning commission process, the zoning hearing board and all that. We do have a 47-acre riverfront development that's coming down the pike. It stretches from Sharpsburg's current riverfront park all the way down to Aspenwell's riverfront park, and it's a giant swath of our land in Sharpsburg that's been a scrapyard for over 100 years and was recently sold. So that's going to be a mixed-use development. It will include, all we know for sure is that it will include a riverfront trail connecting us into the Three Rivers Heritage Trail Network, which is going to be a huge economic boon. But in the meantime, we've got to prepare to make those connections from the riverfront trail back into the community, especially the business district, so that all the bikers who want to stop and get lunch or just want to explore a new town know that they can come into Sharpsburg and hit all the key points really safely and have a good time doing it. We're also doing a business district streetscape redesign. The county gave the borough a grant to hire a firm to do that. So that's including things like crosswalks, bike racks, increased signage at pedestrian crossings, and basically anything to improve the pedestrian experience without hurting the traffic experience or even improving the traffic experience. We have bump outs planned, greater stormwater infrastructure, more trees, so that it's not so oppressive to walk down the street in the summer. And then, of course, always the problem, money. We're going to keep looking for money and grants. We're doing a lot more multi-municipal cooperation, especially with Millvale and Etna, and some with Aspenwell as well, to try and make this not just one municipality that's impacted, but stretching the impact to more like 15,000 people, so that people at the higher level want to be a part of this greater vision that's going to impact a lot more people than just one community. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Kristin Saunders from the city, but thank you all for listening about Sharpsburg for a little bit, and thanks for letting me talk.
I am Kristin Saunders. I'm one of our principal transportation planners in the city of Pittsburgh in the newly formed Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. Let me find the clicker. All right. Apparently it's yesterday on my slide, but today on everyone else's. So I didn't put together a slide kind of just summarizing Pittsburgh, so I'll do that really quickly. You know, we have over 300,000 residents. We have 1,200 miles of streets that we maintain. Some of those are owned by, a significant portion of those are owned by PennDOT. The bridges, for the most part, are owned by the county, and so there's some, we always have to work with those partner agencies to get projects done. You know, we have a lot of topography. We have over 800 city steps in the city of Pittsburgh. Some of those are sort of jumper walks along side of street, and some are actually their own right-of-way, their own street. Some of our streets are staircases, and they're flying through greenways, which is kind of exciting. And then 25% of our city doesn't have access, city households do not have access to a personal vehicle, and 50% of the city downtown workers get to downtown by transit. And so I just to paint a really quick picture of who we are. Another thing that topography really results in is that a lot of our streets either sit in valleys, along rivers, or kind of on ridges, and there's not a lot of street grid like you might see in other cities. I had an intern recently who moved to Chicago, and I got to have lunch with him when I was there for a conference, and he grew up in Pittsburgh, and he was kind of just like, you know, I get on my bike after work and I start biking on this street, and 7 miles later, after biking on a flat street, the same street in one direction, I get home. And that's just not, you know, and he's just like, what is this? You know, having a hard time comprehending that. We don't really have that here. We, you know, our streets, I think, are forced to really have multiple, we ask a lot of our streets because we don't have that connectivity that you might see in flatter cities. I also see that as a value. I think, you know, the hills definitely create a beautiful city. They create kind of clustered communities. I don't know if there's ever been a study done, but I would say they help our business districts because you can only walk so far in Pittsburgh. So those neighborhood business districts are maybe stronger than I've seen in other cities. It's totally personal experience, not a study. But yeah, and the other thing, you know, is that our streets are 50% of our public space. So we think of these huge parks we have in the city, but when you really look at the square footage that your streets take up in a city, they're half of our public space. And I think that's a really important thing. That's something we tried to talk to people about in the process of passing our Complete Streets policy. Most people don't go, to a park or visit a park on a daily basis, but most people are on a street, and that's really their only connection with public space. Some people might get in a car in a driveway and only exit that car when they get to downtown, but most people are sort of interacting with their streets on a daily basis, and that is their biggest connection to public space. Okay, now I'll start. So like many, just the focus of a Complete Streets policy is really to just go from, looking at our streets as really having one function, and that is transporting automobiles, to having many functions. And this is not a new concept. We've sort of, we've created this world where we're really focused on the automobile. And so we're really just trying to kind of redefine what streets mean, what planning and transportation planning means. So in 2015, Eric also spoke about this, but the mayor did issue an executive order, the Complete Streets executive order, that provided kind of a platform for us to start working on this, and sort of permission for us to start working on this. We are, a strong mayor city, and so it was kind of giving us direction to work on the policy. And it took about a year to pass, and I'll talk a little bit about what happened in the meantime. But it was, adopted by our planning commission, which is really important, and then also approved by city council. And then November 2016, the policy was adopted. In January of this year, we started a new Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. So we started a whole department to focus on transportation. That's not necessary in every city, but we really found, through a lot of thought and careful planning, that it was necessary here. We have some leadership in transportation, and we have kind of one voice who's in charge of making those decisions. Those decisions and this policy was kind of spread out across many departments, and so we saw the value in creating one department. So we had a pretty traditional public launch, but I would say the thing that really surprised me about this public launch is 250 people showed up, and I don't know, not that I've done this in a lot of cities, but I find Pittsburgh's really interested in the city, and they're interested in talking about their streets. So that was pretty surprising to me. And then sort of the focus of the public launch and the focus of selling this kind of idea was focusing on streets as part of a network. Every street has to perform many, many different functions, and they have to perform as part of a network. There's very, the value lessens the more disconnected arms you have in your bike network. The value of doing these projects lessens the more, a bus sits on a crowded street and has trouble getting through because you haven't built the right infrastructure for a transit network. So, starting to talk to the public about these things as part of a network. We can't just build that bike lane over here if we're not going to think about it in the rest of the city. We also talked about the state of our streets, sort of just giving people, I think being very frank with your community, talking about how much these things cost, talking about the deferred maintenance that maybe, the amount of streets that are maybe falling down hillsides, things like that. I think just being very frank about the decisions that you're faced with making every day was very valuable. We encourage people to expect more from their streets. And then we were also honest about what this policy was going to become. I appreciate that you mentioned that this policy really doesn't have a lot of teeth. No policy like this really has a lot of teeth. It's just saying one should think about many things when talking about a transportation project, which is great. I mean, it's a starting point, but it really is, you really do have to build in those implementation items, and you have to have, city staff who are committed to working on them. So there's a lot of follow-ups. And it's just important to be frank with the community about this. We are going to take a year to write something that really is just a framework and a policy. So the next thing we did is we really tried to get this is actually the very next day after our public launch. We also found a lot of value in really getting the right people in the room. I know that is, hammered into every sort of public process you've ever been a part of, but especially with streets, and especially when you're trying to sell something that is maybe new to the community, as being, everyone cares about our streets. They're important for public health, they're important for economic development, they're important for economic, social, and just plain mobility, just plain getting from one point to another. And so getting all those people in the room was really, really valuable, just showing showing our elected officials as well as us that a lot of people care about this and for very, very different reasons, and incorporating all of that feedback into the policy. So in addition to kind of having this stakeholder meeting, we also, this is a very quick slide, but we also met with a lot of people. We sort of had this, we took this on a road show. We wanted to make sure that a lot of people knew what we were doing and why we were doing it, so that when we came back to them with zoning changes, when we come back to them with new policies that have a little more teeth, it's not a surprise. This was all part of a framework. We also, we had a policy. I only put this slide in because I'm impressed with how much Pittsburgh wants to know about these policies. We had a very, very, what I would consider a very nerdy, very boring meeting, and 60 people showed up to listen to me sort of droll on about the nitty-gritty of policy, which I find very impressive, and I loved it. So you probably heard this earlier this morning, but there are many ways to pass a policy. We chose the most common, apparently, to pass a resolution. So I'm just going to go through our principles really quick. How many people have read the City of Pittsburgh's policy? Just curious. Kind of how? Okay. So it shouldn't be too boring. So we framed ours around 5 principles. So the first one is experience. We really want to encourage people to expect more from their street. And that has so much value. I mean, those same things that I mentioned before, health, economic development. The only way we are going to encourage people to walk more is if it's pleasant to walk on a street and they feel safe. So experience is very important. Design is important. It's important that people think of these spaces as a piece of their public realm. The environment, of course, we do want to encourage better forms of transportation that have less impact on the environment. Our streets are great conduits of stormwater, so we want to manage those well. And then, of course, it has public and health impacts. Our streets are, I think transit times or commute to work times are some of the most telling numbers when talking about sort of economic mobility. So the ability for someone to move from sort of the lower economic status to higher, to making more money. Transit times is a huge factor, and the ability for someone to have multiple options when leaving their home to get to work, so that if one option fails one day, they can pick up another one. That is a huge factor in workforce development. And so we saw that sort of overlapping mobility options was a big piece of the policy. And then we also talked about how we wanted to install these with fiscal responsibility. So we wanted to take advantage of something we're already doing every year, paving, to install many of these projects. I would say we haven't gotten great at that yet, but we're trying. And one example of fiscal responsibility is we're doing more sort of pilot programs with regular paint, which doesn't last quite as long. So we're using paint to sort of change the street to allude to what might be a final implementation. But we're kind of testing it for, say, a year before we actually do that complete reconstruction. So even looking a year ahead to roads that are going to be paved next year, trying something this year so that we can maybe solve some of the issues. Of course, access is very, I guess at their core, streets provide access from your home to everywhere else you want to go. And so we want to make sure that people of all ages and all abilities have access to that access, have the ability to go seamlessly from where they live to where they want to go. And we want to do that equitably throughout the city. We do, despite talking about sort of slowing traffic down and adding a lot of things to the mix, we want to do this as efficiently as possible. We want, we don't have that many streets, as I've mentioned before, and we really want to make sure that they work to, every square foot is really thought about carefully. We want to hire great designers, and we want to think about the design of the streets very carefully to make sure that they are as efficient as possible. We talked a little about network. Another thing that was special about our policy that we hadn't seen in policies before Pittsburgh is the intelligent technology partners. We really, we already have, CMU is already testing some of the robotic signals in our streets today. And we want to encourage that. Maybe we don't want to encourage testing. We don't want to be the guinea pig when we're talking about safety, but we want to encourage, trying these mobility partnerships and make sure that we want to be on the forefront of where signals are going. Maybe in the future we won't need big poles to hold signals because they'll be more adaptive, and we want to make sure that we are on the forefront of that, and we're lucky to be in a city where people are testing that in our city. So we put that into the policy. And then also, today, we want to be a model for the region. You know, we were one of the first in the region, and we want to make sure that we are continuously saying yes to these kind of invitations and saying yes to invitations to come to your city so that we can encourage more of our communities around Pittsburgh to pass similar policies. So just to talk about applicability, so this policy, although it has very little teeth at the moment, is applicable to development review. So we can sort of evoke this policy when talking to a developer about their street. We can say you are on a street that is an important piece of the bike network. We really don't want to add on-street parking on your side of the street, or whatever the answer is, but we have that capacity. It's applicable to large-scale maintenance, so not paving, but other projects, and then large-scale capital improvements and grant requests. And this section actually talks about how within the project prioritization process, complete streets should be a component. So before we even have a project on the table. It's not applicable, this is pretty small, but it's not applicable to private driveways, small private driveways, small scale routine maintenance. We did require that it is applicable to, say, new private driveways, not small scale, because anything that we might want to take on as the city at some point in the life of that road, we want to make sure it's built to city standards. So those big private, maybe currently private driveways, the policy would be applicable to that. And then the other thing is that we have a lot of state and county roads, and so we can't really force those owners to really do exactly what we want. We have to work with them, which is great. It's great. Sorry, I didn't know what. No, I mean we have to work with our partners, and so we're having more of those meetings, and we're making sure that every step of this process, the state and our county was involved so that they know our intentions and they know what's coming. Very similar to development projects, all the partners have to be involved the entire time. So exceptions are if it's a threat to public safety. Of course, we can rebuild a road without putting a bike facility or a new transit stop in. Undue hardship, we put this in because we have a lot of crumbling streets, and sometimes we have to do kind of emergency maintenance. And then if it's structurally infeasible, because we have a lot of streets that are sitting on retaining walls that we might not be able to widen or add more load to, things like that. So this is the fun part, I'd say. A big part of the policy is the implementation items, and this is what's really going to give that policy teeth. I'm very excited to say that we launched our advisory group. Some people in the room are actually part of that. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And we've started the process of creating complete streets design standards so that we're not, in those meetings with developers saying something differently every time. We have a document that tells people what our requirements are within the city of Pittsburgh. And there are so many design guidelines out there now because almost every city has created them. So it's a lot of copying and pasting and sort of deciding what works for your city. We also want to develop a network plan so we can talk about the connected transit, bicycle, and vehicular networks. And we want to redo our TIS guidelines, which is what we require of a development when they are developing a project of a certain size. We want to make sure that that incorporates people walking, biking, and taking transit, not just their impacts on the vehicular network. We're working on code updates. Those, as you all know, take forever. And then benchmarking. We want to make sure that we're measuring whether this policy is working or not. So we really want to define what that means. So our major follow-ups, and this was not directly because of the policy, but we started a new department, and we have a new director. Karina Ricks moved here to be the director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And I think that's important because we even titled it to talk about mobility and not transportation, because it really is mobility by many modes and economic mobility. And we have a mission and a charge. So this is all very exciting for me because I was working in the planning department and working with my coworkers were mostly in DPW, and it was just having like a new department and a mission and charge is very, very exciting. And I want to talk a little bit about our new department and kind of what we're measuring for success. And I think these are very important because, for one, something I've discovered through this process is the importance of making this policy real to everyday users so that there is buy-in. And we're kind of taking that into how we develop our measures of success. So I think we've tried to create measures that are very real for people. So sorry, that's a little small. 0 traffic-related deaths or serious injuries, that's an easy one to make real for people. But every household in Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 30 minutes of travel from home without the requirement of a personal automobile. That's going to be very hard to measure, but we're working on that, and that is that's a very personal thing. Like I chose to live right next to a grocery store because, access to food is a huge part of everyone's life. All trips less than 1 mile are easily and most enjoyably achieved by non-vehicle travel. 60%, we don't have this data for our own city, but I know, nationwide, 60% of a lot of the traffic you see on streets are those trips less than a mile. Almost everyone can walk a mile, and we can provide facilities that make it easier for even more people to walk an entire mile. We can make sure that there's shade, that there's benches, that the streets are wide enough, the sidewalks are wide enough, that there's curb cuts at every signal, and that people feel safe crossing. And so that's really that's about design. Streets and intersections can be intuitively navigated by a 14-year-old child. That's another one that is hard to measure, but I can definitely, tell you which streets and intersections are not easily navigated by a 14-year-old child. We want our street grid to be really intuitive. If a 14-year-old child can do it, then everyone else in this room can navigate our city as well. The combined cost of transportation and housing does not exceed 45% of household income. So that's, another one that we're starting to measure, and transportation is the second highest household cost, and we all know that the affordable housing conversation is very important, but affordable housing in places where people can actually get to work is even more critical. So we're trying to make that a goal of the department. Like I mentioned, we started a Complete Streets Advisory Committee, one of the implementation items from the policy itself. We started in August, and we've met 3 times. And this is a very abridged set of deliverables, but we're really looking to that committee. Actually, I have a list. Okay, maybe this is better. So we're putting together a committee. We're putting together a committee slowly, so that we're trying to get more voices in the room. I think we often probably all suffer from going to a meeting and seeing the same faces every time and discussing the same issues without new input. And so we're really trying to build this group slowly so that we can get more voices in the room. So you can see we kind of developed the advisory committee, but also a group of users, which is more like the interagency group. So the advisory committee, I think, will meet about monthly, and we have a lot of deliverables, and we have a lot of ideas for them. And then the sort of whole group will meet quarterly to kind of discuss what was done. So some of the things we're tasking that committee with, of course, we don't expect them to make plans, but really critically, we're developing a diverse group of stakeholders to really critically review new transportation policy, to review our design guidelines, to develop principles that respond to, that help us achieve these goals that we've sort of set, and to compile data that will be able to measure the success of those groups. That's all.
Thank you both. And I just have to say, we met with Brittany like a few weeks after she became the executive director of the newly formed Sharpsburg Neighborhood Organization, and she was kind of like, I'm not quite sure exactly how this is going to go. What do you guys do all day? And within a month, she was just off and running. So I say that every community could use a Brittany. That would be great. Okay, so how do we actually, pass and fund these policies? That's going to be our last speakers today are going to talk about that, and we're running a little bit behind, but I think we can still be on time for lunch, which is, we all know, the most important part of the day. So I'd like to welcome up Chris Sandvig, who is the policy director of the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, and Jesabel Rivera-Guerra, who is the community health director at the American Heart Association, to talk to us about developing and funding our policies.
Hi everybody. Jesabel Rivera, I'm with the American Heart Association, and maybe you would be asking, what does the American Heart Association has to do with complete streets and planning and all this stuff? A couple of years ago, our entire organization nationally has been changing from focusing in research and funding to really understand what's the best way to improve health, and we understood that that is focusing on social determinants of health. And of course, like how people can get from their homes to their work, to their provider, to their food, to their school, and whatever else they need to live and to be healthy is through the transportation and through the streets and how they are going to get there. So that's definitely why we want to make sure, or we want to make complete streets as our goal with you. So I really wanted to talk a little bit on different fundings and resources that we have available. And before I get there, I'm very excited, and I really appreciate that Brittany and Kristin, Kristin specifically, the measures of success at the end. It's not about the entire process, and if the process goes well, the measures of success is, are we making people healthier? So I think that should be our focus into questions like, how are we going to do a complete streets in my community that is difficult, towards how can we make it happen? Is there another way that we can get people to move from point A to point B and make their life easier to be healthy? So I think that should be our focus, and a little bit of help to see how we can get there. Let's see. Yes, we're going there. Chris is going to be also giving this presentation and to give you a little bit of resources. And one of the things that we did was that we were talking with all of the different partners of what things are out there in terms of us to get it started with this process of complete streets. And we came up with these 5 categories of the different ones. We were initially talking about phases, but the reality is that we don't, you can start anywhere in this cycle. So I'd like to start with the partnerships part, because many of the fundings, of course, I would say all of the funding, it's grants based. So you need somebody, you need the time to kind of put the information together and write it up. So we need to make sure that we can partner with different organizations that can help us to write those grants or put that information together, because of course complete streets is not the only thing we do, right? I wish we could, but it's not the only thing. You are doing a lot of other stuff, and it can become overwhelming. So the first thing that we need to do is to find out what partners, who do we need to connect with. And of course you have, a non pun intended, but we have Connect that can really help us to find who can we reach out to. And also we have platforms like Live Well Allegheny that also reaches out to all these different resources out there in the community. So who out there in our community we can partner with that can start helping us with writing all these different grants. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is the education and awareness. So of course, for you to get buy-in from the entire community, you need to put out there education campaign, awareness campaigns out there. But the education and awareness is not only before complete streets, it's also during complete streets and once complete streets is already done. There's a research out there that says that and there's a lot of questions that I have in terms of the actual method of this research, but that walkability is not connected with improvement in cardiovascular health. Of course it's not. It's not the walkability, but everything that is happening during that or inside that walkability that really improves health. It's not going to be the complete street, but how do people actually use those complete streets? And that's where education and awareness comes in. So it's not only before or during or for you to get the buy-in, but also during the entire process to get your entire community participate and to use the complete streets at the end once it's done. And then we're also going to be talking about the policy development and passage, and we are definitely part of the process on how to get that, but experts, we're not the experts on that topic, so that's why Chris is going to be talking a little bit more of that. And also talking about the communication. So yes, once you can have a resolution, you can have a policy, but you need to make sure that PennDOT and engineers and all these other agencies and professionals know about this policy that you have in place. And finally, we're going to be talking about different resources are available building the complete streets. So some of the partners that you can use in terms of the grant making, I would like to mention specifically the ones that are here. Like Bike Pittsburgh, they are the experts in like everything complete streets, and they have been involved in, I think, even starting of a complete streets effort for Pittsburgh, right? So, or part of that starting committee. So, like if you want to at least get started on how do I even, do this, Pittsburgh would be there. Walkworks is also another one, as Brittany mentioned. They are also experts in getting together this complete streets, but also getting this technical assistance to help you write and access some of these grants. And of course, PCRG as some of the examples. So this is the part that I'm actually really the guru about in terms of education and awareness on how to at least get this buy-in and get people engaged in this part. So of course there's other things local nonprofits that you have and different schools that can be involved. But part of the American Heart Association is the Voices for Healthy Kids. And one of the things that Voices for Healthy Kids does is that we have grants that can fund educational campaigns, and those grants can go up to $90,000 for your community. And with that, we have a specific toolkit that can give you from where to get started to how to do an actual workshop like this to get people engaged. And one of the things that we do is that, in the process on how to get started this education and awareness, is that we sit with you, we talk about where you are at in terms of complete streets, we talk about the resources that you have, some of the issues that you currently have, or why not, or why would be difficult, and then we work around that. We start putting in together all these different partners. And one of the most important thing I think that is connecting you with a volunteer that is actually a very passionate student that really wants to do all the nitty-gritties that you don't have the time to do that. So that's one of the things that we also do. And then we, as Brittany mentioned, we do provide all these different materials. We have a plethora of health education literature out there in different languages and different ways. So if you need information in terms of how Complete Streets connects with health, we have it. We have all tons of things. But also postcards that are specifically to Complete Streets, and we have online campaigns already done to get people engaged with Complete Streets. So all this type of things with education and awareness, that's there, and we have it. So, and as I mentioned, Complete Streets is not only into the buy-in, it's also once the Complete Streets is done. And one of the things that we were working with Sharpsburg, that unfortunately we didn't get it, but we're still working on that, we promise, is, and that's something that we also worked in collaboration with Walkworks, and is to put walking routes in these communities that pass Complete Streets, or that have at least a resolution. And an example of a walking route is that we first work with the community, and the community let us know what landmarks they want to highlight, and then we, in collaboration with Walkworks, we go in and then we put and create this walking route with maps, with different things, highlighting things in your community, but we give an opportunity to the community to create walking groups and things like that. So that way, we are utilizing that Complete Streets that you would be building within the community, and the community is already educated about what it is and how they can use it. So that is how, that's one of some of the resources that you have available. And then this is the part that I am not the guru in, although I do have a little bit of knowledge. I will leave Chris Sandvig to talk more about this.
Thanks, Jesabel. Morning, everyone. I realize, well, good noon, I guess. I will do what I can to keep us on task here. My name is Sandvig. I'm with the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. For those who are unaware of who we are a membership-based organization of what I refer to as sort of place-focused nonprofits, predominantly within the city of Pittsburgh and the first-ring municipalities surrounding the city, but extending beyond that as well. We've been around since 1988. We initially were focused on issues around disinvestment in low and moderate income communities and communities of color, bank lending practices, and from there grew into dealing with issues around blight and abandonment, tangled title, land recycling. Public transportation issues are what we have been adding to that since 2009 when we started Goberg at PCRG. And one thing before I go into this is one of the things that I like to focus on in this is that, I appreciate Jesabel kind of picking on this for a little bit, is, okay, and we've heard some of this also is throughout the day, is why are we doing these things? Why are we looking at complete streets? Why are we even concerned about this? There's a couple of things. One is you know, as Kristin said, streets are some of the biggest parts of the public right-of-way that municipalities have access to and control over. The other is in working with community groups and those who are doing development projects, two things. One is often when the infrastructure issue is addressed, the subsidy side of things and the challenges with getting the right development projects off the ground for the community aren't fully solved, but many of those problems can be solved, particularly if you're focusing on place. The other one is that, at least in the case of the members that we represent, often a lot of our folks feel like transportation designs, construction, policy happens to them, that they don't have a voice in that. We actually often focus most of our time and efforts as community development corporations and neighborhood groups on what's happening with private property in our neighborhoods, whether or not it has public subsidy, as opposed to the public right-of-way, which is almost 100% funded by everybody in this room and beyond. So that's kind of where we come to it at. So I will start here on the policy development phase, and you know, full disclosure, in terms of being the policy expert in the room, that is certainly not me, but from a process perspective, I think what's really important in the work that we've been doing in engagement around transportation issues is making sure that you're using national resources, local resources, and making the case, regional resources, and making the case at the local level as to why this matters. You know, pedestrian safety is a huge issue. We are a region that has a lot of millennials who want to be able to access things without an automobile. We are a region that has a lot of baby boomers who increasingly are challenged to use an automobile. And so we have these massive mobility issues in our region that we really need to tackle, and it's about what sort of quality life that we want to provide. There are a host of technical resources that are available out there, and you know, I won't enumerate them all. Communication side of this, as you're going through this, I think is really important. Making sure that the right partners are there within local government, as well as within the private sector, to understand that you're undertaking this. Many places do have private engineering, private design firms under contract to do their planning work. You know, them being aware of this being a priority is extremely important. Making sure that the Metropolitan Planning Organization and PennDOT are aware of that is important. I do want to ask a quick question, first off from a show of hands. How many people here are from municipalities? Okay, now keep those hands up if your main drag is a state road. Practically none of them went down. So going back to the PennDOT Connects discussion, and the fact that your main thoroughfare in most cases in Pennsylvania is a state road, this matters. And this is something even without PennDOT Connects, PennDOT technically is supposed to pay attention to when they are going about redoing roads, and I will get to that also in a moment here. So the money, right? I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people ask that question. What does this mean from a financial perspective? You know, having a policy in place, having an ordinance in place allows you to do things differently. It does compel, as roads are being repaved, whether it's by yourself or being designed, or you're accessing funds, or sidewalks are being done, that you're looking at all modes. And as we saw, there's not a one-size-fits-all for any municipality, but the funding sources I think are important to also consider, because there are resources, existing resources that we can access, and we as PCRG have helped different community groups and even in some cases municipalities access those resources for planning and construction of returning streets and transit facilities to pedestrians. This is just one example of 15 different sources that are on your thumb drive. Some of them are programmatic sources, meaning that this is money that comes to our region from a formula perspective. Some of these are competitive sources, such as Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program, which is long-term for sort of this bucket that, doing pedestrian improvements, transit improvements, bike improvements, safe routes to school improvements has been put into, and others are at the county level, some of them are at the MPO level, and I would take a look at those. Some of those are programmatic. We have roughly $1.5 billion over what they call TIP cycle, Transportation Improvement Cycle, which is about a 4-year cycle coming into this region, just by formula. That's federal dollars, that's PennDOT dollars. Those federal funding sources, the type of infrastructure we're talking about, the type of facilities we're talking about, are an allowable use for those. So again, going back to the PennDOT Connects program and working with the DOT and the MPO on these sorts of things, ensuring that priority is in your municipal guidelines and your planning and policies is a huge leg up as PennDOT is looking at, okay, which street are we going to redo this time? What's going to happen when we take on McKnight Road or Ardmore Boulevard or Penn Avenue out here through Wilkinsburg, and what does the municipality have to say about that? So just by that effect, there's a response that needs to occur there, and I think that those formulaic sources are some that we kind of overlook. The real important part, though, I think, is really making sure that it is a collaborative process. I was part of the city's process, full disclosure, as I think many of us in the room were. And what was really great about it was collaborative from the beginning. It got beyond some of what I would sometimes think is maybe sometimes a stereotype about complete streets, which is including more bicycle infrastructure on it, which, by the way, I biked here today myself. But it is really about how we return the streets to our residents so that we can improve the quality of life and improve the value of the community and attract more investment to them. With that, that's all I got, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Connect. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for your presentations. I'm Lindsay Angelo. I'm the Project and Outreach Manager for Connect, and I'm going to move us into the Q&A session. I think we'll do the same format that we did before. If someone just wants to stand up and ask a question, and then we'll repeat it, and whoever wants to answer it will come on up. So are there any questions from the audience? There's a lot of information, so I'm sure there are some questions.
I don't know if I'll answer this fully, but in Sharpsburg, the biggest anticipated impediment to success, and something that I didn't really see as much as I thought I would see, was getting the buy-in from the community around this. Sharpsburg's been, we have elected officials who have been in office for over 50 years now in Sharpsburg, so things have been done a certain way for a really long time. So I thought I would have to fight a lot more, especially with the cost question, how much is it going to cost us? How much are our taxes going to go up for this, for bike lanes? Are we going to put bike lanes on every street? Do we have to get rid of parking? But these things didn't really come up too much, maybe on an individual basis, but by and large, people got it. Most people have to get from somewhere to somewhere else in their days, so people really got it, and then bringing it to their personal level in terms of how would a safer sidewalk or more well-lit, well-signed crosswalks, how would that impact your family? How would that impact your opportunity to access other opportunities in other communities or get to other communities? Or how would your business be impacted positively if people could ride bikes and park right in front of your door? If people could walk from Etna to Sharpsburg and wanted to do it because it was a nice way to get around, how would that positively impact you? So really getting the community buy-in and being able to demonstrate it was the biggest hurdle that I anticipated, and frankly, it was pretty easy to talk with people and allay their concerns and get them on board with this. And the measures of success we're still working on, but a lot of like health and the pleasantness of the routes is the first stuff that we're looking at.
Something we face a lot is getting 90% of the project done. I don't know if that's something you guys face a lot also, but I'm actually a classic 90%er as well, and I think it's really hard. Sometimes that last 10%, like actually getting something to publish, making sure the right people read it, and asking the question, okay, can I put this online now? Can I put this in front of people? So I think, making sure that you have a plan for that last 10% and that that you're like on it was really important for us.
I think from my perspective, the thing that I've learned is the language that we use really matters in meeting with the community. We have a lot of wonk terms in this line of work, and I love throwing them around myself, and I think I create some on a weekly basis. But getting to the quality of life issues, why don't you use transit if you think there's a lot of transit and it's good? That sort of thing. Why do you drive if you can barely afford if you know this, whether or not you can barely afford the car? Or how are you getting around if you don't have a car? And getting to that point is extremely important, I think, especially in communities where they are often left behind. And these sorts of things just sound as, in some cases, frankly, they come across as, whether they are or not, agents of displacement, gentrification, that sort of thing. The language really matters, I think, making it human.
I have participated but hadn't really seen all of the performance measures like in one place, and everything from access to fruits and vegetables to just seeing the city from a 14-year-old's view. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you came up with those, how you pulled those pieces out, and then also, everybody always wants to know about evaluation. So what partnerships or what are you thinking right now in terms of being able to talk about those measures of success a year or whatever down the line? I'm really interested in that.
Well, I would say that those evaluation measures, they came from multiple sources. They're definitely also from our new director. That was really important to her. Vision, the first one, which is just zero traffic fatalities, that's straight from Vision Zero. I think we've been talking about for a long time a way to connect. All of these things all of the things that we discuss at municipalities are very interconnected and very complicated, and so we needed some very clear tools for measuring that. So I think combining things like food access and access to affordable housing with the transportation component kind of will help us make sure that our city as a whole is successful and not just transportation. I think Karina is our new director. Her experience from other cities, especially she was the deputy director in DC for I think 12 years or something, at a period of rapid growth. And so I think that kind of experience is invaluable. I don't know how many of you go. I just got back from NACTA, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials conference. It's actually great. It's great. Sounds terrible, but it's great. But I think when I started, we had one traffic engineer in the city, and I was the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator, and that was 3 years ago. And I felt like everyone in the city kind of has their role, and they're the only person in the city doing that role. And so it's often hard to kind of reach out to the people doing housing work, to the people doing health work, to really talk about how to make your combined goals work. And going to these kind of national conferences is another place where we learn a lot about how people are setting these sort of combined goals and meeting them, because we're often the only person doing our thing in our community, and it's hard to learn without really taking the step to it's hard to learn without making learning a focus, I guess. So I guess the other way that we are going, you asked about measurement. I don't know. I think at our Complete Streets Advisory Committee, which we're trying to get someone from the health department to come to, we have a whole subcommittee. These are all, I never thought I'd have a job where I said subcommittee so often, but we have a whole subcommittee focused on performance and metrics. So I think the first step is really developing a baseline. I don't know how many people in the city of Pittsburgh can get to a grocery. First of all, I don't know if we have a defined grocery store. What is a grocery store? But I think we do. And then, how many people can get to a grocery store within 30 minutes without an automobile? I don't know the answer to that now. So I think, the first step is really defining the baseline and then setting a schedule for measuring that over time. I mean, I hope these metrics will get better over time. We'll come up with new metrics, Actually, 30 minutes to a grocery store was really easy, and we should have set it at 20 minutes. We'll hopefully get it better over time. But does that answer your question? It's going to be done with the subcommittee. No, but we are, we're getting the right people in the room who actually have access to data. We want, the health department has access to data sets that we don't know about. The Southwestern Pennsylvania Regional Data Center has many data sets. We are working with UXR, which is the University Center for Urban Research at Pitt, that houses the Southwestern Pennsylvania Regional Data Center. So getting all those people in the right room, we want to incorporate economic development data into how we look at the success of transportation more. So part of the Complete Streets Advisory Committee is getting people in the right room. And something else is the Complete Streets Advisory Committee. We don't know the future of that. We've decided that for 2 years we should focus on these subcommittees and have this set of deliverables. But we don't know exactly what that committee is going to become. Is it going to be this everlasting thing that is constantly reporting on the success of transportation in Pittsburgh? Is it going to become a transportation commission? Is it going to become a review board? We have no idea. And so I think, we don't know. We're just starting.
So Braddock is awesome. Good stuff going on there. Obviously walkability, more walkability can only help. The cost thing definitely came up in discussions with us. We haven't raised taxes in some amount of years. Sharpsburg is a very affordable way for kids from lower income families to get into the Fox Chapel School District, so I'm very cognizant in every decision that I make of not increasing the cost burden on residents further than property values going up and increasing taxes already is. So the cost thing is kind of where I sat back and thought about what I was trying to accomplish with this and whether I was going to go a more defined ordinance route with very explicit requirements from developers and on the borough itself, or if I wanted to kind of ease into it with a resolution saying, hey, this is what I'm hearing from the community, this is what I'm hearing from residents, from leaders here, even from the business owners. They want it to be easier to walk up to their businesses, to their houses, to the parks. So the cost thing was kind of just easing back on how hard I was hitting the hammer down for the first step. So nothing's required, and there is exceptions for if there's an undue cost burden or if it doesn't make sense for the area. It can be approved by it doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be a bike lane on every street and stuff like that. So there's no really requirements, which is a double-edged sword because you can't really enforce it, but you can at least advocate from it. And if some developer's coming in and saying they want to make a closed-off gated community development, we have a really solid rallying point from the municipal standpoint and from the community planning standpoint that, hey, this is what the residents said they wanted. So it at least gives us that moral high ground, I would say. As for the businesses, I thought, again, we'd have a lot more pushback, mostly in terms of parking issues, because parking is a catastrophic issue in Sharpsburg, or at least it's perceived as one. So reassuring business owners that we weren't, when we were putting in the bump outs, we weren't removing parking, and talking about this in the context of a greater transportation strategy and a parking development plan throughout the borough, that was important. But there's one plan that's being floated through the streetscape redesign and the community vision plan around shutting down a block of that's right off of our main street that has great old style European buildings, and turning it into a pedestrian thoroughfare that wouldn't be accessible to cars. And I really anticipated a lot of pushback, not from the new business owners, but from the business owners who've been there for generations in some cases, but they were excited about it. They're excited to kind of try new things because what we've got now isn't working as well as it could. So they know that there's room for improvement, and they're kind of fingers crossed so far, they're pretty open to change. So they're included in the process? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's, because I've only been here for 4 years, it's kind of, I don't want to be the presumptuous person who's coming in and trying to dominate what I think should be happening in the community, so getting the public buy-in is absolutely necessary and step number one, in my opinion.
So this is where we can definitely provide resources on. We have a lot of different information about why you would benefit everything that exists right now in the community. One thing that I would say is that they want it, but they don't know they want it. Because if you asked about, do you want complete streets, chances are that they say no. But if you ask about, do you want more people to come in, do you want more people to be able to walk to get to your business, they will say yes. And that's what complete streets is. So it's a matter of like making sure that they understand what it actually is, because there's a lot of myth around complete streets, and actually that's why we wanted to create this workshop. So what we really understand that it's not a bike lane, there's a lot more to it. So we have a lot, like by we, I mean like all the partners here, we have a lot of resources to help in that process of education of what really is. And then we have a lot of resources to get community buy-in, for the community to have a higher voice and say, I want you, my business, to have this access. So, and that has like a bigger push to the strategy.
Yeah, that's a challenge with what I've found as we came out of the community development funding and how that works into transportation funding and how that works. And frankly, a lot of the sources at the federal and state level especially, and that was just an example of one source, there are plenty others, that it's often cash, it really is. Now, what that looks like, I think depends on how you're structuring the project. Too. That can be something within a municipality's budget as part of their street resurfacing schedule or sidewalk repair schedule that's already happening on that street in some ways. So it's not necessarily in kind, but it is local money. I'm not the expert on that, though. That is where having a relationship with the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, I think is important, and having them involved as soon as possible, because they can help you understand what sources work, what sources don't, and also having the county involved in that, because the county has some programs of its own, but also can be, a champion if it's a project that makes sense. So that's extremely important. There are sources where, in kind is something that can be done. The Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program is one of those. The multimodal fund, the DCED portion of the multimodal fund, you can do some things with because DCED does things like that. If there are maybe depending on the size of the project, maybe there are leaders in the community who want to help out in some way. So there are ways to take that on, but again, starting the relationships with the people at a sort of larger area who are working with these sorts of sources on a more daily basis in the programming of them, even as you're developing the project, I think can help you out tremendously.
Okay, I think that's it for Q&A. I want to thank all of our presenters for all the work that they put into this. I'm going to give them one more round of applause. So I'll dismiss you all so you can, if you want. So thank you again to our presenters. There's a lot of effort and work that goes into this, and I really appreciate how nice of a process it was to do all of this. So thank you all. And I also want to thank Every Day's a Sunday, who catered this entire event, and they were also really excellent to work with, and to Hosanna House for this really excellent space and venue. And I know that Kristin said it at the beginning, but I just wanted to reiterate that putting this workshop together has been a really smooth process, and it's been a really perfect example of partnering organizations coming together to make something happen. So to all of our partners, we would not have been able to do this without everybody. And I also want to note that the PowerPoints that are up here are not on your jump drives, but they will be on the Connect website tomorrow or the day afterwards, so you'll be able to access those and also get contact information of the presenters. And I'm going to move us into the last portion of the workshop, which is the lunch and discussion portion. And during lunch, which is going to be set up in just a couple minutes, you're going to have the opportunity to talk with the presenters and experts that have been giving us a lot of really good information, and even start to craft maybe your own policy for your community. At each seat, there's a model ordinance from the county, and also we stole Sharpsburg Borough's Complete Streets resolution, so you can steal that too. But this is going to be a really good time to just start to craft it based on your community, and put all your notes together. And we're hoping that this isn't going to be the end of the conversation, but really the beginning of what is going to happen next. Thank you, everyone, a lot for coming, and please flag one of us down if you have any questions. And don't forget the postcards and evaluations. Thank you.